Hey, this is Coach Reeves. Today we're going to talk about greatest common factor. It's a skill set that you've already learned. It's something you learned in the past, but we're going to review it to make sure we're ready to go when we start doing some more extensive factoring. Okay? A couple of rules that we want to talk about. If the leading term is negative, then the greatest common factor will be negative. Meaning, if the first term has a negative, then we're going to factor out a negative when we take out the greatest common factor. Okay? Also, we're going to choose the largest number, which is the coefficient. We're looking for the biggest number that goes into everybody. And we want to choose the smallest exponent. So if we have multiple variables, if you have multiple terms that have variables, say we have 3 terms and they all have the same variable, we want to choose the smallest exponent. Okay? So we're looking for the biggest number that goes into everybody, and if they all have the same variable, we're looking for the smallest exponent. Okay? Looking for the lead term if it has a negative, the biggest number, and the smallest exponent. All right, let's look at some problems. So on your worksheet, number 1, I have a negative in front. So my GCF, my greatest common factor, will have a negative. And then we have 2 numbers. I'm looking for the biggest number that goes into both. Okay? Now obviously we're starting with smaller numbers, but here's the way you do this. Okay? You can have 12 and 4, and you're looking for the biggest number. So what we can do is we can factor these with a tree, and we can say that this is 2 times 6, this is 2 times 2, this is 2 times 2. We're looking for things that they have in common. This problem has 2 2's. This one also has 2 2's. So what is 2 times 2? The answer is 4. Okay? So your 4, the 4 would be the biggest number that goes into both. It's your common factor. All right? Let me show you something you can also use on the calculator. I wish you could do it by hand, but let's just say that you're challenged and you want to use your calculator. All right, so we're going to go new. We're going to start with a calculator. Okay? Let's say that my 2 numbers. All right, we're going to go menu. We're going to go number, and we're going to look for the greatest common divisor. Menu, number, greatest common divisor. And we're just going to make up a couple of numbers. I'm going to make up, say 21, and we'll say 56. I don't know what the greatest common factor, the greatest common factor is. So what we're going to do is we're going to come over here inside our parentheses. We're going to type in 21, comma, which is way over here at the bottom left-hand corner, comma, and then we're going to type in 56. And then we're going to hit enter. Your greatest common factor is a 7. 7 is the biggest number that goes into everybody. All right? What did we say? Menu, number. All right, let's look at this. Menu, number, greatest common divisor. Okay? Menu, number, greatest common divisor. Now, I would only want you to use your calculator if you really thought you needed it. All right, most of the numbers are going to be small enough. Hopefully you know your times table. But this is what you can use. You can use your calculator if you have one at the house to use menu, number, greatest common divisor. All right, let's get into this. So we already said, that the lead term was negative, so we're going to factor out my GCF will have a negative. Then we decided I want the largest number that goes into both of these, and we're going to say 4. Okay? And then it says they both have a P. They both have a P, so we know we're going to take out a P, but which one is the smallest exponent? Remember in the rules a while ago, we said we want the smallest exponent. So my smallest exponent is a 2. This is your GCF. This is your greatest common factor. But they're going to ask you, it says factor the common factor out of each expression. So that means don't just find the greatest common factor. They want you to factor. So you're going to end up with a parentheses. So what I tell my students is then you can come back and you want to divide by your greatest common factor. Divide by your greatest common factor. A negative divided by negative is a positive. 12 divided by 4 is 3. We have p to the 5th over p to the 2nd. The quick way is to subtract these. But some people get stuck on this and they don't remember this. But p to the 5th means p times p times p times p times p. There's 5 of them. Over p to the 2nd. P times p. This will reduce. This will reduce. I'm left with p times p times p, which is p to the 3rd. Now again, the quickest way to do this is to go 5 minus 2 is 3. You can subtract your exponents. And then we go a positive times a negative. Divided. A positive divided by a negative is a negative. 4 divided by 4 is a 1. And the p squares, they could cancel or they would give you a 1 also. So when you take this, once you find your greatest common factor, it's not a bad thing when we're first starting out to make a little division problem so you can reduce and so you know what to put inside the parentheses. Let's try another problem. I have 3 terms now. The first term is not a negative, so I do not have to have a negative in my GCF. I've got 3 numbers. That thing that I showed you, using the calculator, will work with 2 numbers. It will work with 3 numbers. But in this case, I'm looking at this, and I know that the number 5 is my number that goes into all 3 of these. Okay? So my number 5 goes into everybody. This has an A. This has an A. But this does not have an A. So I do not include an A with my greatest common factor. The only thing that I have in a greatest common factor is just the number 5. So then I have my parentheses. I'm going to come over here and divide by 5. I'm going to divide by 5. I'm going to divide by 5. And 15 divided by 5 is a 3. A to the 4th. Then I have a plus. And I have 30 divided by 5 is 6. A. And then we have a minus sign. And then I have 50 divided by 5 is 10. The 5 is my greatest common factor, and I have factored using my greatest common factor. Okay? Let's try one more. Now, look at this. We have more than one variable. This has an x and a y. But first of all, we're going to look the lead term. The lead term is positive, so I'm not going to factor out a negative. I'm looking for the number that goes into all 3 of these. The biggest number that goes into all 3 of these is a 7. This has an x. This has an x. This has an x. Everybody has an x. So when they all have the same variable, we want to choose the smallest exponent. So we know we're going to take out an x because they all have it in common. But this is x to the 6th, x to the 3rd, x to the 2nd. We want the smallest exponent on our variable, on our common variable. Now this one has a y, but neither one of these terms have a y. So it's not part of our greatest common factor. This is our only greatest common factor. This is it right here. Okay? So we're going to come over here and we're going to divide by 7x squared divide by 7x squared. We're going to divide by 7x squared. 7 divided by 7 is a 1. Now we know the 1 could be optional, but we're going to put it here for a teaching purpose. All right, then we have x to the 6th over x to the 2nd. Do you remember what we said? What's the quick way to do it when I have x to the 6th and x to the 2nd? You can subtract these. 6 minus 2, that's going to leave me with x to the 4th. I do not have anything that can go with the y squared, so we just bring it along. Plus sign. 49 divided by 7 is 7. I have x to the 3rd, x to the 2nd. X to the 3rd over x to the 2nd. Remember, we can still subtract. All right? We can still subtract. And 3 minus 2 would be 1, or x to the 1st. Okay? We know the little 1 is invisible, but we know it's there. We put a plus sign, and we say 28 divided by 7 is 4. And the x squared over x squared can reduce or cancel out, so we are through. Now remember, this 1 is optional. Most people will not put it, but we used it right now for teaching purposes. Okay? Greatest common factor, and this is what happens after you take out your greatest common factor. This is what's left over. Okay? All right, let's try one more. All right, now look at this. This is kind of tricky, but I have an x, a z, a y. I have 3 variables. So let's see what happens when we have 3 variables. The lead term is positive, so I do not do not factor out a negative. I'm looking for a number that goes into all 3 of these. It turns out the number 5 goes into everybody. This term has an x, this term has an x, this term has an x. They all have an x in common. This is x to the 2nd, this is x to the 1st, this is x to the 1st. We want the smallest exponent, so we're going to keep x to the 1st. This does not have a y, this has a y, this does not have, there's only one term that has a y. But this has a z, this has a z, this one has a z. So they all 3 have a z in common. So we're looking for the smallest exponent. Z to the 4th, z to the 3rd, z to the 3rd. So I need z to the 3rd. That's the smallest. This is my greatest common factor. So we're going to come over here and we're going to divide by 5x z to the 3rd. 5x z to the 3rd. 35 divided by 5 is 7. I have x to the 2nd. There's an invisible little 1 sitting right there. I have x to the 2nd, x to the 1st. Remember, we're going to subtract. So 2 minus 1 is just going to leave me with an x. I have z to the 4th, z to the 3rd. We're still going to subtract. That leaves me with z to the 1st. I have a plus sign. I have 45 divided by 5, which is 9. I have x divided by x. These will cancel. I have z to the 3rd over z to the 3rd. These will cancel. All I'm left with is a y, so I bring my y over here. Minus sign. 5 divided by 5 is 1. 5 divided by 5 is a 1. I have x divided by x. This will cancel. I have z to the 3rd. I have z to the 3rd. These will cancel. Do you see why it's important to put the 1 here? Because even though you think everything cancels, you just can't leave a minus sign and some space. You have to put the number 1. The number 1 has to be there because 5 divided by 5 is the number 1. Close your parentheses and you're finished. Okay, so this is a quick review. I know you already know how to take out the greatest common factor. I'm just going to make sure that you understand and remember the rules. Okay, so do your worksheet, practice your greatest common factor. I promise you it's going to get a little more challenging as we get into factoring. All right, good luck.